Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's press briefing. My name is Marie-Agnes Heine, and I'm in charge of the communication department at the European Medicines Agency. And during today's briefing, we will update you on the most recent developments regarding COVID-19 vaccines and treatments, and then we will open up the floor for questions. I'm joined by 3 EMA experts today. Dr. Marco Cavaleri, the head of Biological Health Threats and Vaccine Strategy and chair of the EMA Pandemic Task Force. Dr. Fergus Sweeney, the head of the Clinical Studies and Manufacturing Task Force. And Dr. Georgy, the head of Pharmacovigilance. Please note that your microphone is disabled for the duration of this briefing and will open up only if you raise your hand to ask a question. As always, the briefing is broadcast via YouTube and Europe by satellite, and the footage can be used free of charge by all media, and you will find the respective links in the invite you received. I'm now giving the floor to EMA's Head of Biological Health Threats and Vaccine Strategy, Dr. Cavaleri, who will provide you with a short update. Dr. Cavaleri, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's COVID-19 press briefing. I will provide you a brief update of where we stand on the recent developments, and then we will open the floor for your questions. So to start with, the EMA is currently evaluating data on boosters for adolescents. Last week, we received an application for a booster dose of Comirnaty in the age group 12 to 15 years. A similar application for the age group 16 to 17 years is already under evaluation. EMA is reviewing this application in an accelerated manner with the objective to reach an opinion as soon as possible. We are reviewing also data on heterologous boosting with currently approved COVID-19 vaccines. This is a vaccination strategy where different vaccines are used for the initial or primary vaccination and the booster. The EMA COVID-19 Pandemic Task Force, the ETF, had given a recommendation already before the end of 2021 on heterologous vaccination, and now the variations are ongoing to formally update the product information. A shortened interval of 3 months between primary series and booster dose will also be considered as part of these procedures, following our preliminary recommendation. In general, all the findings confirm that heterologous boosting is safe and effective. In fact, the data show that heterologous boosting with a messenger RNA triggers a similar or even higher immune response than with the same vaccines is used, including when a vector-based vaccine is used for primary series. Concretely, we have application to add heterologous boosting as an indication for both Comirnaty and Spikevax, and we are currently reviewing the data submitted by the company in support of this application. In this context, it is important to stress that the responsibility for vaccination campaigns, including the decision of which vaccine to administer and to which population group, remains within the public health authorities in the member states, who are best placed to weigh up different parameters in their decision-making. As for the use of a second booster dose of one of the messenger RNA vaccines, there is currently not enough evidence from clinical trials or real-world experience to help us make a recommendation. We need a lot more information, for instance, on how effective the current vaccines are over time as the Omicron wave continues to unfold, before we can start considering the need and timing of any additional booster dose. We would also need to see the results of the clinical trials showing the impact of a 4th dose on the immune response and cross-neutralization of Omicron and other variants of concern, and the preliminary results from Israel, which have been disclosed, and today there was a preprint out, constitute an interesting starting point for the review of the evidence in this respect. An exception are additional doses for people who are severely immunocompromised. I would like to reiterate that for those patients who should have received 3 doses of a messenger RNA vaccine as their primary vaccination, a 4th dose would be their first booster shot, and this additional dose we already recommended. The discussion with manufacturers on their progress with clinical trials of investigational vaccines with updated composition is also intensely ongoing. clinical trials looking into safety and immunogenicity of first or second booster of current vaccine compared to Omicron monovalent or bivalent vaccine will provide first evidence of the value of updated vaccine in terms of immune response against Omicron and other variants of concern. We have seen laboratory studies in animal models not suggesting a significant gain in immune response or protection against Omicron vaccines compared to the current ones when given as booster following a primary series with the current vaccines. However, these data are preliminary and more evidence, including from clinical trials, is needed before we can better understand the type of immune response that can be achieved following vaccination with an adaptive vaccine. Still, these data underline the importance of waiting for clinical trial results with the updated vaccines to define the best approach for vaccine composition to be considered in the future. Second-generation vaccines are also progressing into late-stage clinical trials or have already done so. The EMA has been open to the option of approving new vaccine based on comparative immunogenicity data, provided that the new vaccines are based on the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. In particular, neutralizing antibodies against the original strain Omicron and Delta could be the basis for inferring that adequate protection can be achieved. Epidemiological data from Europe keeps showing a high number of cases of SARS-CoV-2 infections. Largely, this is driven by the rapid spread of the Omicron variant and its subvariant that is called the BA.2, which appears to be more transmissible than the initial Omicron variant. We are receiving and assessing data on effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines and treatment against this subvariant. For now, we believe that vaccines protect people against the BA.2 subvariant as they do against the original Omicron strain. There are some reports, however, about a decrease in neutralization of the only EU-approved monoclonal antibody that could neutralize the original Omicron variant, which is Sevudis or Trovimab. Whether such decrease in neutralization would lead to a reduction in efficacy is currently not known, but it is hypothesized that the level of this antibody in the body could still provide sufficient neutralization of the Omicron BA.2 subvariant so that it will remain effective. We will continue to monitor this situation very carefully to gather any confirmatory evidence. We are encouraging the collection of real-world evidence and clinical trials data to provide additional evidence on the effectiveness of the approved antivirals and neutralizing monoclonal antibodies during this Omicron wave and in patients with different vaccination status. The rolling review of the monoclonal antibody cocktail Evusheld is also progressing as expected. A more precise time frame will be defined at the beginning of March. With respect to Molnupiravir, this will be discussed at the EMA Human Medicine Committee, the CHMP, next week. And lastly, a potential expansion of the approval of Spikevax in children 6 to 11 years of age will also be discussed at the CHMP next week. I also would like to take this opportunity to highlight the continuous efforts by the EMA and manufacturers to increase vaccine manufacturing capacity and supply. Last year, the EMA approved 33 new vaccine manufacturing sites, increasing the total number from 19 to 52 sites. The vaccine produced at these sites have enabled the rollout of vaccination campaigns across the EU, and they also help to support the COVAX initiative that delivers COVID-19 vaccines to low and medium-income countries around the world to protect their citizens. Let me reiterate that vaccines continue to be the most important cornerstone of our response to the pandemic. Recent real-world effectiveness studies have shown that vaccination, and especially boosters, play a significant role in the prevention of severe outcomes from infection by Omicron and other SARS-CoV-2 variants. People who have received free vaccine doses show a high degree of protection from severe disease and hospitalization. Therefore, once again, we call on citizens to complete their primary vaccination series and to get a booster shot if eligible. I will stop here and give the floor back to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cavaleri. And dear colleagues from the media, you now have the opportunity to ask questions. So please turn on your camera if you want to ask a question. And as usual, click on the icon at the bottom of the WebEx window to raise your hand. When I give you the floor, we will unmute you and you can ask your question once your microphone has been enabled. So far, the first question I'm seeing here is from Helen Collis from Politico. Helen, please.
Thank you very much. I see that in the US, the FDA is delaying its review of the Pfizer's the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine in 6 months and over, due to new data coming out convincing the regulator to wait. Do you have any information about this data, please? And can you share any insight on that? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Helen. I'm giving this question to Dr. Cavaleri.
Yeah, indeed, as you know, the clinical trials that Pfizer-BioNTech is conducted in this age group is still ongoing, as they also declared, and therefore we are looking forward receiving the data from these studies later on during the spring. We hope for April that we will be able to receive them, but let's see exactly what could be the time frame for this.
Thank you very much. So far, I don't see any additional hands up. So that's the last chance to ask a question today. Now they are coming. So I have another question from Angelo Di Mambro from ANSA. Angelo, please.
Yes, thanks. My question is about the fact that in general, you say the national authorities, Mr. Cavaleri, you say the national authorities are those in the best position to take decision on vaccine campaign and so on. But what do you think in general of the let's say relaxing of the measures of the non-sanitary measures, let's say, in member states?
Thank you very much. You know that vaccination campaigns in national countries or national states is not within the remit of EMA. But I don't know whether Dr. Cavaleri wants to add anything, or Dr. Fergus.
Well, if I can start, indeed, this is very difficult for us to say. This is in their competence and is really about public health more in general. So we, as a regulatory body, we are really focusing ourselves on the vaccines and the therapeutics that could have tackled this pandemic and putting an end to it. So it's a decision that they take based on the status of the current Omicron wave. I don't think we can say more than that.
Thank you very much. I'm now giving the floor to Thomas Müller from Bloomberg. Thomas, please.
Hello. Yes, I just had a question. I was wondering if you could comment on the process regarding Molnupiravir. Is the data robust enough? Is there likely going to be a decision next week, or would you ask for more evidence?
Thank you very much, Thomas. I'm giving that question to Dr. Cavaleri.
Yeah, so as said, next week the CHMP will be discussing this procedure and the availability of the clinical data from their pivotal study. So before that, it's very difficult for us to say much more than this. And of course, after the CHMP deliberation, we might be in a better position to update you on where we stand with this.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from Rosanne Le Saint from Mediapart in France. Rosanne, please.
Hello, I wanted to know, do you know when the EMA will be able to examine the Sanofi COVID-19 vaccine marketing authorization application file, please?
This again is a question for Dr. Cavaleri.
Yeah, so as you know, this vaccine is under rolling review, and we are in discussion with the company to really understand when the clinical data from their pivotal trials can be made available to us so that we can then really define exactly what could be the timetable. So again, very difficult to say much more than this at this stage, even if, of course, the rolling review process on the other areas has been advancing quite substantially in the meanwhile.
Thank you very much. I have another question from Helen Collis from Politico. Helen, I give you the floor again.
Thank you. Marco, you mentioned earlier the requirements for clinical trials for the next generation of vaccines. And you mentioned that vaccines that were based on the spike protein would, correct me if I got this right, would only require immunogenicity trials to be reviewed for authorization. What would the requirements be for vaccines that aren't just based on the spike protein? So, for example, a whole virus approach.
Thank you very much. The question on the requirements for second-generation vaccines, Dr. Cavaleri, please.
No, thanks for raising this, because it gives me the opportunity indeed to clarify this. So if it's a whole virion vaccine, still the spike protein is an important component of the vaccine and is going to be also one of the primary antigen from which immunogenicity will be deriving. So indeed, this will be applicable also for that type of vaccine. The difference will be if a vaccine is really excluding the spike protein. So spike protein is not part of the composition of the vaccine, like nucleocapsid or membrane or other internal proteins, then it will be a completely different landscape. And in those circumstances, it will be impossible to apply the concept of immunobridging for the simple fact that is a completely different antigen than the vaccines that are authorized and showed efficacy in clinical trials.
Thank you. We now have a follow-up question from Rosanne Le Saint from Mediapart. Rosanne.
Yes, excuse me, one question more about Sanofi. The rolling review was launched for marketing authorization for the first dose. If Sanofi repositions itself on the booster dose, what does it change for the EMA?
Thanks. A question on the booster dose of the Sanofi vaccine. I don't know.
I think it's difficult to say at this stage. Again, we started the rolling review based on a clinical data package that would cover primary series, so efficacy with the primary series, and also we know there will be data generated with the booster dose. But at this stage, we are not yet been discussing exactly what could be the initial claim from Sanofi Pasteur for the approval and whether the first booster dose or the second booster dose will come later on as potential variation. So simply too early to say, but of course we are very much open to discuss with the company all the clinical data that they have been generating.
Thank you very much. I now see no more hands. Last chance. Yes, I have a question from Virginie Baguet. Virginie, please. Virginie, do you hear us?
Yes. I have a question related to...
It's very difficult to understand you. Can you come closer to the microphone, perhaps?
I have a question related to the menstruation problem related to the mRNA vaccine. I would like to know why you are doing a review at that time. Were there new data?
Thank you very much, Virginie. I'm going to give that question to Dr. Genov. It's about the menstrual disorders and why we are doing another review.
Okay, thank you for the question. We've previously informed you that we are closely monitoring, as for any other potential safety issues, any potential impact of COVID-19 vaccines on menstrual disorders. Last year, based on the data we have seen at the time, our safety committee concluded that a causal association cannot be established. And this is still the case. We don't know if COVID-19 vaccines are linked to any impact on the menstrual cycle. Now, as we do for other safety issues, as new data emerges, we would look again into the new information to determine if there could be potential link. Few general points to make. The data that we've seen so far indicates that these disorders it's a large spectrum of different issues. So from increased bleeding to missing bleeding. So there is no pattern. I think that's the first thing to say. They've also been transient. We've seen that in reports we received through our spontaneous system, but also some studies that are emerging based on self-reported outcomes. The other point is with regards to the concerns in menstrual disorders, as we previously discussed, might be linked to questions with regards to fertility, and I have to say that COVID-19 vaccines are not linked to any negative impact on fertility. Another consideration is, of course, pregnancy. And there, as we've discussed previously, it's important to highlight that pregnant women are at increased risk of severe outcomes when it comes to COVID infections, and hence the importance to vaccinate pregnant women. So I think these are probably the main points to make. And as the assessment of all available data progresses, we'll keep you updated on the outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do not see any additional questions, so time to close this press briefing today. So thank you very much for your participation, and thank you very much also to the colleagues here with me who participated in the briefing today. Our next regular press briefing will take place on the 3rd of March. And if you have any further questions, please do not hesitate, as always, to follow up with the press office at press@ema.europa.eu. Thank you very much and have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.